Hi, welcome back to the fourth installment of the parenting series that I've entitled You Can Do It. And I know I've joked some about, gosh, Paul, you probably don't know my children or me, but I really do believe you can make progress. I really do believe that you can make a difference in your children's life and you can raise healthy children. So let's begin tonight's study with that. We're going to take a fresh look at child discipline. Now, I understand that each generation of humanity has their way of disciplining children. They've done it a variety of ways. I look back at the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and later in the study we'll look specifically at the 70s. I picked that one because I was a high school person at that time. But we're going to take a fresh look, and I hope you'll be able to hold some of the ideas in your hands as you're thinking about them. They might be some that you've never thought of before. So let's start with this. What is the goal of discipline? So when we talk about disciplining our children, what is it that we're talking about? My mind real quickly goes to the New Testament's use of the word disciple. Disciples were those who were learning a rabbi's way of life, especially the 12 with Jesus. They were learning what he thought was important, what his values were, what he believed about God and God's kingdom. So we are discipling our children. Parents are disciplers. They're creating apprentices of a specific way of life, meaning the parent's way of life. So here's your first time to reflect. Just give yourself some time, as we've said before. You can start the video back up at some point, or if it's live, you can do that. But what do you believe is the purpose of discipline? If there are some others in your group, you can take some time and share, or if it's you and a friend or a spouse, kick that around for just a little bit, and I'll see you back. Here's a working definition of discipline: an activity or exercise that develops a child's character. That's what we're wanting, isn't it? For this child to become a certain type of person. So discipline is not just, I want you to go and take time out, or, oh, here's the consequence for hitting your brother. We're actually doing much more than having disciplinary actions. We are creating the character that's in this little child that's been entrusted to us. So what character qualities do you want your child to have? Hopefully there's some that you have. Honesty, kindness, you can read this list: industrious, ethical, appreciative. This is just a smattering. You will get a copy, probably a PDF through the mail, if you're taking this course, that will give you a pretty extensive list of character qualities. And the reason I did that is so that you can reflect. We had another one of those times to reflect. You can begin to look through that list. Maybe you don't need a list. If you do, good. If you don't, that's fine. But to list the character qualities you want your child to have or to exhibit. Discipline is how we guide them into those character qualities. And of course, be sure that these character qualities that are important for you and your child, that you have them about, this is my rough guess, 75% of the time in your life. No one gets it perfect. No one. Jesus did, nobody else does. So consistent, so that the child would know that is a value that you carry. Let's start here. Here are some activities, exercises, things that are done with the child that don't do not, D-O-N-T, develop character. Look at this list. And you can sort of self-monitor, self-reflect about which of these that you may struggle with. Judging. It's real easy if you're frustrated or if your emotions are up to be judgmental to a child, to put them down. The second one is minimizing, where their feelings or their actions or their thoughts are not really valued, they're not important, just the parents are. Shaming, wow. That one is like embarrassment, but on steroids, like a lot more of that, where a child will not feel like they belong. They will not feel like they're loved. And by the way, children aren't the only ones that experience shame. I do, and I'm sure that you do. Sorry about smacking my microphone and making that extra noise for you. Also, a harsh voice tone can communicate real negative or negative facial expressions. Again, you're going to have to do a lot of these to impact the child. It doesn't need to be a part of your daily routine. These things will not develop character. Maybe some of these faces you've had before. I know they look pretty familiar to me. The frustration, the blaming, the kind of frowny brow of the first lady on the far left. And then there's that minimizing statement underneath the two ladies. Put a smile on. You're not sad. Well, he probably really is sad if you say that to a child. They really do have their feelings and their thoughts and their behavior. Now, look to the far left of the slide in white. These activate your child's emotional brain, talking about the judging, minimizing, and shaming. These activate your child's emotional brain, which carries your voice, being the parent, or when I was parenting, my voice, carries my facial expression and my voice tone, and the child carries that voice, that look, and that tone inside of themselves. And you know what? After a while, they begin to treat themselves like we treated our children. They begin to live out those messages. If they've heard them a lot and they weren't, from an earlier study we mentioned repair, they weren't repaired. Now we're taking that same list of things that don't develop character. What they do produce or develop is fear. These things can distance a child from the parent. They can also create resistance where a child says, I'm not buying that. And then you get pushback from that. Very different than a pushback that needs to be corrected. Another time to reflect. Can you think of a time when someone judged or minimized you? Recall what it was like when someone scowled. I'm trying to do the frowny face, frowny brow, and used a harsh voice with you. What was that like? What did it make you want to do? This is a way to create some empathy with you and your child. A way that you can begin to step over into their world and kind of get a little clearer perspective on what impacts them when you are communicating. What activities or exercises develop a child's character? We've said what doesn't, like judging, shaming, minimizing. But here's some things that do. Lead the child in the way that they can follow. I love that statement. What it means is lead a child in a fashion that where they are developmentally with their skills and their knowledge and their little spirit and their heart, that they can literally be successful at what you're wanting them to do. No matter how much your 2-year-old wants to use the electric carver to carve the turkey, don't let them do it. Don't let them do it. They're not developmentally ready to do that. So a little bit of developmental knowledge that you can get off the web for each age of your child. Understand the nature of a child. Vulnerable, valuable, needy, imperfect, wanting. We've covered that in an earlier study. And then activities that come from an emotionally regulated parent. I hope you keep hearing me talk about emotional regulation, or the ability to manage your emotion, not stuff them, not overexpress them, but in a regulated way, relate to your child. Here's another thing about this character development and discipline. Be sure your child has a real clear grasp of the family rules, the family guidelines, the family principles, whatever you might call them. It's the do's and the don'ts, as you see on that small graphic. Be sure children know consequences for breaking the family rules. They need to know what the family rules are. And those rules are probably built, and those principles and guidelines are built around the values that you and your spouse, or if you're a single mom, whatever situation, or grandparent, when you're parenting, your rules and consequences are around those things that you highly value. That's why it's important to choose those consciously, not just haphazardly try to parent. You see the little guy here sitting, he's done something mom or dad didn't like, or grandma, and he's taking what looks like a timeout. And by the way, if you give a kid a timeout, and we'll talk about this when we talk about methods of discipline, be sure that you're not pushing them away and they're not off in a part of the house where they feel disconnected from you. If it's a mom or a dad, but I think about a mom that's in the kitchen, she sets the little one down in the living room where it's just right there that she can kind of hear what's going on. That's my suggestion for you. You can look here and you'll see that you're going to need more time than you realize to actively, meaning you're participating, actively develop your child's character. I know you know this. They don't change fast. And by the way, I don't either. I'm 65 years old, and I have studied a lot about change and transformation and growth. And my brain will not change fast. It has to be a slower process. And I just want you to know, if you've got little bitty ones, or if you've got elementary age or teens or whatever child age you've got, that you're going to need to persevere and realize there's not an instant fix for growth. I love this quote as well. Everything in life of lasting value is the result of an incremental process. You see the little baby feet over to the side of that quote? Those are baby steps. Next time you're around a little one, watch how small the baby steps are. But they get around, right? Those baby steps are the foundation for a lot of change. So when you're working with your children, there's going to need to be an incremental process, baby steps. Think about this as far as the process. Paved stones. Let's say there are 50 of them out there. To get to the 50th one, you have to start with the first one. The first one goes to what? The second, the third, the fourth, with an eye out for the goal of the 50th one down the way. It's the same thing with parenting. Another time to reflect. What is it that pressures you to rush when you are applying consequences or discipling your child or teaching them your way of life? What can you do to slow the process down so that you're not feeling so rushed that if you don't get it right this time, that something horribly negative may happen? It's going to take time. You need to remind yourself somehow, whatever way you want to. Put a note in your iPhone on the calendar, or whatever, Samsung, whatever kind of phone you've got. I'm not advertising for iPhone. That development and maturity takes much repetition. Let me say it again. Character development takes a lot of repetition. In other words, If you say to your child, like I've said to mine when I had the little ones, how many times have I told you to pick your toys up? Really, we need to think about that statement because it takes hundreds of times for a child to get the neurology of what it means to get a toy out and then to put it up. We're going to have to develop that Christian character quality of patience and perseverance. Well, what about discipline? This graphic says a quick overview of positive discipline, and I'm all about positive discipline. I don't think everything we do with our child that they encounter with us, especially when we are applying consequences or correcting, I don't think they're going to always think of it as positive. You're the parent, and guess what? They're the child. We're not trying to be best friends. We really are trying to love them in a way that would be, gosh, much better than just best friends. So here are some ideas for you. Here's some guidelines about discipline. Do no harm. You will learn more and more as you age and as you grow and as you mature as a parent what is harmful to the child and what's not. And it literally is a moving target. What is difficult or challenging or hurtful for one child may not be for another. And you might have one of each of those in your family. But do no harm. We know a lot about emotional abuse today, where a child is minimized a lot, or judged a lot, or shamed a lot, or ridiculed a lot. And we know in the long haul that builds up and builds up and builds up. And the child has somewhat of a trauma type experience because so much of it happened over his whole life. So become familiar with those things that could be harmful to your child. Step beyond just the way you were parented and get more ideas and knowledge, of course, from Scripture and then from sound other sources. Remember, the kids are fragile and vulnerable. Even when they're mad, they're fragile and vulnerable. They're small. They don't have the emotional intelligence or skill set or brain development that you do. Even when they're frustrated or even when they're saying they don't like you, which is a hard one. We'll talk about that a little more when we talk about triggers. They're still fragile and vulnerable. So handle them with care. How about those triggers? Whoa, Dr. Paul, do we have to talk about those? Yeah, in a real gentle way we do. We need to talk about those because we can prepare ourselves and grow ourselves so we're not triggered in as many ways. You'll have a PDF that will list these triggers that are on this little graphic. Sorry, it's a little blurry. It's the best I could do, but you will have a PDF listing of these. Here's a few. What if they start whining? What if they're like a wambulance? I mean, sometimes people get upset at whining because they were never allowed to whine. It was wrong. What if they say they don't like you? Or what if they say they hate you? Or what if they say, Mom, you don't love me? Don't they know how to pull those strings? When things get broken, when they have tantrums, when you have to repeat yourself 150 million times, that's all part of the character development process. They don't grow fast. And if you can know those triggers, it's going to be of great benefit to you. Another time to reflect. Look at that PDF with the triggers on it. Which ones mostly apply to you? I'm sure you don't get triggered by all those things, but which ones apply to you mainly? Are there others that aren't on the list, that are not on the graphic or on the handout? Find a way to keep these triggers at the front of your mind when you're parenting. That way your mind will be prepared when they come up again. It's not even a bad idea to imagine yourself in a situation with your children or child when the triggers happen and see yourself, by God's grace, responding a very different way. Here's one that we don't think about, and it might be a little unfamiliar to you, but do not allow your child to become an extension of your self-esteem. I know we don't talk about it a lot, but as parents, we don't always value ourself like we should. We don't always think of ourself in a loving fashion the way God does. We don't always, this is a Bible verse, love our neighbor as ourself. We forget the self part. And if we don't, there is a chance that some of that comes out on the child. Now, please, just a thought that hit me, don't become overly vigilant about every time you do something wrong with your kids. We just need you to be relatively consistent. And I'm saying, this isn't research, just me, 75% of the time. Yeah. Well, I'm exempling this idea of how a kid can become an extension of your ego or self-esteem. This is, as you might know, Michael Jackson, and that's his dad, Joe. And I just assume you know of the abusive past and the control of Joe. Joe was a musician, and he wanted more than anything else to have a bigger platform. So rather than doing it himself, or maybe he wasn't able to, he shaped those poor boys into that. And we know the consequences of that. As a dad, I want my kids to play baseball. That's what I played growing up. I'm a smaller guy, and the playing field was kind of equal if you were smaller. My kids play basketball. I can't hardly dribble and walk, much less dribble, walk, or run and shoot. But you know what I did know? That it's got to be what they like, what they want. Number 5, work at staying emotionally replenished. Keep your emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, relational tank full. You know how we have the little arm on the gas tank for full or empty, whichever way my finger's supposed to go? Well, think of you having an emotional tank, a spiritual tank, a mental tank, a relational tank, a physical tank. And you've got to keep those things half full and above. Or your parenting is vulnerable and it could deteriorate. Find out the things that fill you up. Also find out the things that drain you, and be sure that you're replenishing. Here are 2 parenting mistakes to avoid. You can see in this graphic, a child can get too much of our intense emotion. See the little girl covering her ears? It's just too much for her. So one thing that happens is that when they get too much, we've got to learn to pull away and to back off. It's so important that we learn, and that's a mistake that parents can make. The other extreme is the child being left alone too much after a disciplinary session or a corrective or teaching. He looks kind of sad sitting there. They don't need to be overwhelmed by us and our emotions, nor do they need to be neglected and pushed away. So be aware of those 2 extremes when we're thinking about childhood discipline. If you follow the guidelines that I've been providing and over this series, you're going to be a person that can use a variety of corrective and teaching methods. There you go. Methods. So a variety of things can be helpful and useful depending on the child. Each child is different. And depending on the situation, you can give them choices. That's a good thing to do. You can say to your little child, you can pick up your toys now, or you will have to let me help you pick them up in a few minutes. Or you can get your clothes on, or I can help you get your clothes on. So giving them choices is good. You can distract or redirect. Can't do that all the time, but you can do that sometimes, especially if they're younger. A timeout done appropriately is a good thing. Positive rewards of any sort, and you can be as creative as you want to be. And then you can push the rewind button. I like this one. That's where you just tell a kid they get a second chance. Yeah, you can tell the child, I really think you just need a second chance. And the last one that I want to talk just a little bit more about is spanking. And I've put a line through that because, and I would like you to hear me out because I know spanking is still common. I am a person that does not believe that that method of discipline is ever going to be really effective. And I want to give you some reasons why in just a moment, especially as it has to do with the brain and the neurology of a child. But I made a copy of a little article, and I mentioned this earlier in this lesson that we would refer back to the 70s and what were common types of discipline in the 70s. Spanking was one. Actually, that was very, very strong in the 50s, and maybe before that. My research just goes back to the 50s. There was a strong belief that if you physically punish them, it helps them. That's not what we believe now, but it was at one time. We would often hear in the 70s, you're not going to have any supper. I don't know if that's a shock to you, but nope, go to bed without your supper. Oh, how about this one? I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap. I want to say, Dad, I'm good. My mouth's clean. I brush my teeth. That would be for using inappropriate language or talking back. There was a whole lot of hand slapping going on. That would be one of the ways a parent would correct a child. Stand in the corner. How about this one? I didn't experience this one, but hold a match till it gets down to the point that it burns your fingers. You're trying to instill in them the danger of fire. It really doesn't make sense, right? To burn a kid, to teach them the danger of fire. But that was a method. You'd be grounded for a month. You could do nasty chores, the ones nobody wanted to do, clean the toilet. You could embarrass them. I think there's been too much of that, where a child is ridiculed in front of his friends or his family members, made fun of. And here's the last one. If you catch a child smoking in the 70s, make them smoke the whole pack. I mean, watch them turn green right in front of you. Well, as you see, spanking has been around. There's still a large group of people that do that, but let me just give you my reasons, and all I ask is that you think about it. Your child's brain has an attachment. Think about this. It hooks. How do you do that? Yeah, hooks. An attachment and a detaching type system. Hooks, detaches. When your child's distressed, that brain automatically and innately moves your child to seek connection from a safer other, usually a parent, but anyone they trust, a safer other. When the safer other is not available, maybe mom's not in the same room or whatever, the child activates a detachment system from the seeking connection, and they go into a fight or flight mode, one or the other. Yeah, they're going to either try to protect themselves, usually they're so small, they'll go to flight. Spanking activates in your child's little brain, that emotional brain, the detachment system. Gosh, what does that mean, Paul? It means your child is going to be in fight, flight, not going to be looking to connect to you when they're spanked or hit. The sad thing is that the child's natural tendency is to turn to the parent when it's difficult or threatening. And when we have spanked them, oftentimes maybe too much or too hard, the parent, who is the source of comfort and protection, becomes a source of fear and terror. That's sad. Just think that through. Think of alternatives and be real sensitive to God about the directions you take. Here's that imagery. See how the attaching happens in the graphic to the left? Protect me, take care of me. See how the detaching happens? The dad looks like he's angry and she's trying to get away. That's just how it works. Well, that's the end of our fourth installment of sessions and the teaching that I've been allowed and privileged to do with you on parenting. I'm sure you're thinking, why didn't he talk about this, this, or this? Yeah, you're right. There are probably hundreds of things that need to be talked about. I hope this has been beneficial. I've tried to make it very practical. You can review things and practice, practice, practice. And you know what? I really do believe that you can do it.